She picked up the case file like any other day, until she looked up and saw him. The man in handcuffs wasn't just another defendant. He was her childhood best friend. What he said next left the entire courtroom speechless. This is a story of friendship, justice, and one moment that changed everything. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs just moments earlier, but now it had fallen into a heavy silence. Cameras clicked faintly in the back as reporters leaned forward, sensing drama in the air. Lawyers shuffled papers, clerks waited for instructions, and spectators sat stiffly on polished wooden benches. At the center of it all stood a man, tall, still, with tired eyes and handcuffed wrists. The dull beige of his prison uniform seemed to drain the color from everything around him. His gaze remained fixed on the floor, like someone already halfway to defeat. Behind the high bench, presiding over the trial, sat Judge Eleanor Hayes. Known for her sharp mind and no-nonsense rulings, she carried herself with dignity and grace, the weight of justice practically stitched into her black robe. But as she glanced up from the case file, she froze. Her hand, steady in 100 previous trials, trembled as it rested near the gavel. Her heart skipped a beat, then pounded like a drum echoing off the courtroom walls. She knew that face. Even with the lines of age and the wear of hardship, she knew him. Jerome! The name slipped out, barely louder than a breath. No one else heard. But for Eleanor, time stood still. This wasn't just another defendant. This wasn't just another case. This was Jerome Carter. Her childhood friend. Her protector. The boy who once raced her home on bikes every afternoon, laughing like nothing in the world could hurt them. The same boy who gave her his sandwich when she forgot her lunch, more than once. The same Jerome who sat beside her on the school steps and told her he wanted to design buildings so tall they touched the clouds. And now he stood before her, hands chained, accused of armed robbery. The charge carried a possible sentence of 15 years. Her stomach turned. Oh, how could this be him? A life once shared. Flashes of memory flickered in Eleanor's mind as the courtroom resumed its slow rhythm, lawyers speaking, clerks whispering, witnesses waiting to be called. She remembered Jerome as a boy with big dreams but heavy burdens. His mother had worked nights at the hospital, and his father had left when he was still in diapers. Despite it all, Jerome was always kind. Always quick to share, quick to smile, quick to take the blame when Eleanor got caught climbing the neighbor's apple tree. They'd parted ways after high school. Eleanor left town with a scholarship to law school. Jerome stayed behind, working 2 jobs and taking care of his mother when she got sick. They wrote letters at first, called once in a while, but life pulled them apart. And now, here they were. Judge Eleanor Hayes. Defendant Jerome Carter. 2 kids from the same block, now staring at each other across a courtroom soaked in tension. Eyes that still knew each other. Eleanor tried to focus on the case. The prosecutor began describing the robbery. A late-night liquor store hit, a masked man with a gun, cash taken from the register, and the suspect caught nearby with a torn glove that allegedly matched one found at the scene. The evidence wasn't ironclad, but it was enough to raise doubt. Still, all Eleanor could see was Jerome's face. He hadn't looked at her yet. Not once. Maybe he didn't recognize her. Maybe the years had built too many walls. Or maybe, just maybe, he recognized her the moment he stepped into the room, and couldn't bear to look up. She cleared her throat and leaned slightly forward, speaking with the same firm voice she'd used in dozens of cases before. "Mr. Carter, do you understand the charges brought against you?" Finally, he looked up. Their eyes met. And in that one silent moment, the years between them melted. Recognition. Regret. Something unspoken passed between them, heavier than any sentence she could deliver. Jerome gave a single nod. "Yes, Your Honor," he said. His voice was deeper now, rougher, but it still had the quiet strength she remembered. The weight of the gavel. Eleanor straightened in her seat. She was a judge. Her role was not to remember the past, but to uphold the law. And yet, how do you judge someone who once shielded you from bullies? How do you remain impartial when the accused once patched up your scraped knee with his own T-shirt? She didn't know what the rest of this trial would bring, what witnesses might say, what evidence might unfold, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was personal. And whatever happened next, would change both of their lives forever. That night after court, the halls of the courthouse were quiet, emptied of journalists, echoing with a faint hum of cleaning staff and distant doors closing. Judge Eleanor Hayes sat alone in her chambers, a single lamp casting warm light across the deep mahogany desk where she now rested her arms. Her black robe, once crisp and authoritative, hung heavy around her shoulders like the weight of a decision she hadn't made yet. The media was already buzzing. They called her the Ice Queen of the Bench and the cold-eyed judge presiding over a major case. News outlets praised her composure. Talk shows debated her sentencing history. Social media dissected every expression she made in the courtroom. But behind the walls of her chambers, behind the quiet and the formality, she was shaken. Deeply. And not by the case itself, but by the man at its center. Jerome Carter. The name alone hit her like a forgotten song, full of buried melodies and half-remembered lyrics. Memories that refused to fade. Eleanor leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling, eyes glassy with memory. She couldn't stop seeing Jerome as an 8-year-old boy, skinny, full of energy, with a quick smile and a bigger heart. He'd been her best friend growing up on Sycamore Street. They used to race bikes down the cracked sidewalks, pretending to be superheroes saving the world. He taught her how to skip rocks across the pond. She helped him build cardboard forts in his backyard. And when she cried after getting a D in math, Jerome sat beside her under the old oak tree with a notebook and said, "Don't worry. I'll help you figure it out." And he did. That boy, that version of Jerome, was kind, smart, and full of dreams. He used to talk about being an architect. He said he wanted to design buildings that felt like home to people who didn't have one. Said he'd build his mom the biggest house in the world. Now that same boy stood before her in a courtroom. In cuffs. Accused of armed robbery. A 15-year sentence hung over him like a shadow. She couldn't make sense of it. 2 paths, 1 street. Eleanor walked over to the bookshelf and pulled out a yearbook from high school. She hadn't opened it in years. Flipping through the pages, her fingers stopped on a photo. There they were, Eleanor and Jerome, side by side at the science fair. Smiling. Hopeful. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was grief for what could have been. After high school, their lives had split like a fork in the road. She'd gotten a scholarship, left town for college, then law school. She'd had mentors, internships, access, and second chances. Jerome. He stayed behind. Took care of his sick mother. Worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. No one mentored him. No one opened doors. He'd written her a few letters in college. She'd replied at first, quick updates, promises to visit. But then life got busy. She told herself it was natural to drift apart. Now, decades later, here he was again. But this time, it was under the harsh glow of courtroom lights. Questions with no easy answers. Eleanor sat back down and opened the court file again. She read it slowly, searching for something, anything, that explained the gap between the boy she remembered and the man now accused. The robbery report felt thin. A liquor store. A mask. Cash missing. A man seen nearby with a matching glove. But no weapon had been recovered. No clear video. One shaky witness. It wasn't solid, but it wasn't weak either. Still, something inside her, something deeper than the law, whispered, "This doesn't feel right." Could Jerome have fallen so far? Was it possible he'd made one bad choice under pressure? Was he protecting someone? Or had he been at the wrong place at the wrong time? Was this even about guilt, or about the system always being ready to see a black man in handcuffs as guilty before the trial even began? She didn't know. But she needed to. Because tomorrow, the case would resume. The press would return. The prosecution would speak. The jury would watch her for cues. And her job, her sacred duty, was to remain impartial. To deliver justice. But justice wasn't blind to the past. Not when it stared back at her with eyes she knew. A quiet decision. Eleanor closed the file and shut off the lamp. She sat in the dark for a long time. Not just as a judge, but as a woman who remembered. As a friend who forgot to check in. And as someone who now had the power, maybe for the first time, to truly make a difference. She didn't know what the truth was yet. But one thing was certain. She would find it. Not because of sentiment, not because of guilt, but because she owed it to Jerome, to herself, and to that 8-year-old boy who once swore he'd build a better world. One brick at a time. The third day of Jerome Carter's trial began like the ones before, under a cloud of uncertainty. The courtroom was filled to the brim. Word of the case had spread fast. A man from the community. A past with the judge. A robbery charge that didn't quite add up. The press called it the Sycamore Street case, spinning narratives and theories faster than the facts could unfold. Judge Eleanor Hayes took her seat at the bench with her usual composed demeanor, but inside, a storm was brewing. She had reviewed the evidence over and over. It was flimsy. Too flimsy for a case with stakes this high. The prosecution began the day by presenting what they claimed was new clarity. First came the grainy security footage, barely more than shifting shadows. A man in a hoodie entered the liquor store. You could see his shape, but not his face. Not even clearly enough to prove race, height, or build. Next, the key witness, a young man who claimed to have seen Jerome running from the store. But under cross-examination, he faltered. He'd originally told police he only heard someone shout, "Go!" He didn't see a face. Now in court, he said he could have sworn it was Jerome. The defense grilled him on the inconsistency, and the jury shifted uncomfortably. Then came the smoking gun, a wallet allegedly dropped near the scene. The prosecutor waved it like a trophy. This wallet, found just a block away, contained Mr. Carter's ID. But no fingerprints. No security footage showing him drop it. And the defense argued that anyone could have stolen his wallet. Jerome had even filed a missing wallet report 2 days before the robbery. The prosecution's voice was confident. But their case was anything but. Then something happened no one saw coming. The stand that broke protocol. As the judge prepared to dismiss for lunch, Jerome stood up. His attorney turned to him quickly, whispering urgently, "Don't." Not without preparation. But Jerome took a deep breath. His voice, though calm, rang with resolve. "Your Honor, may I speak?" Eleanor hesitated. Technically, he could. Defendants had the right. But it was risky. Most chose not to, especially without their counsel's full guidance. Still, she nodded. "Proceed, Mr. Carter." Jerome stepped forward, facing the jury. "I know what this looks like," he said. "I know what it feels like to be standing here in this suit, and to have people assume the worst of you." He paused. The courtroom was silent. "I was near the store that night, but not because I was robbing it. I was delivering groceries. To Miss Turner. She's an elderly woman I've been helping for months." He glanced toward the gallery. "She lives just around the corner from the liquor store. She's got arthritis. Can't always get to the store. So I help her. That's what I was doing that night." The courtroom murmured. The prosecutor rolled his eyes. "There's no record of that delivery. No timestamp. No receipt. Just a story." Jerome didn't flinch. "She pays in cash," he said. "And I don't do it for money. I do it because she doesn't have anyone else." The voice that changed everything. Then, from the back of the courtroom, a voice rang out, clear though tremulous. "I can confirm it." Heads turned. A woman stood up, small and slightly hunched, her white hair neatly tied in a bun. She leaned on a cane, steadying herself as every eye in the room turned toward her. "I'm Miss Turner," she said. "He's telling the truth." The bailiff moved toward her, unsure whether to escort her or stop her. But Judge Hayes raised her hand. "Let her speak." Miss Turner stepped forward, her presence commanding despite her age. "That boy has helped me every Thursday evening for nearly 7 months," she said. "He picks up groceries, takes out the trash, even reads my mail when my eyes get bad. The night of that robbery, he was in my kitchen, putting away cans of soup." A collective silence fell over the room. "I'm not here because someone asked me," she continued. "I'm here because I watched the news and knew something was wrong." She turned to the judge. "That boy wouldn't hurt a soul." The judge's heartbeat. Judge Hayes sat stone-faced, the way she had been trained. But her heart was pounding in her chest. She looked at Jerome, then back at Miss Turner. This wasn't just a testimony. This was a turning point. Years of courtroom experience told her when a story cracked, or when it cut through the noise like truth often does. Quiet, sincere, and unexpected. Jerome stood still now, arms by his side, no longer trying to prove anything. Just waiting, perhaps for justice, perhaps for disappointment. He'd been there before. And Eleanor realized, he wasn't just defending himself. He was reminding the world, and maybe her, of who he really was. After a brief recess, the courtroom doors closed behind Judge Eleanor Hayes, but her thoughts raced as fast as the reporters outside trying to piece together what had just unfolded. The testimony of Miss Turner had shifted something, not just in the trial, but in Eleanor herself. She did something she almost never did. She summoned Jerome Carter and his attorney into her chambers. The air in the room was heavy with silence. Her chambers, usually filled with law books and quiet authority, now felt smaller. More personal. The years between them felt like a fragile thread, stretched but never broken. Jerome stood tall, hands clasped in front of him. His public defender sat quietly beside him, unsure of what this unexpected invitation meant. Judge Hayes looked directly into Jerome's eyes she remembered from childhood, though older now. Wiser. Wounded. She spoke gently, her voice stripped of titles or distance. "Why didn't you tell the court who you really were?" Jerome hesitated, then gave a faint smile, more sad than amused. "Because I didn't want a favor," he said. "I didn't want people thinking I was trying to get special treatment because we used to be friends." He glanced down, then back up. "You've done great things, Eleanor. You got out, made something of yourself. I didn't want to drag your name into this." Her throat tightened. "You didn't bring me down," she whispered. "You reminded me who I'm doing this for." Tears welled in her eyes. Not from guilt. From truth. Because in all the years she'd sat behind that bench, passing sentence after sentence, she had forgotten that justice wasn't just about punishment, it was about people. And Jerome wasn't just a defendant. He was the boy who helped her believe in herself. The one who gave more than he had, even back then. The hidden thread of truth. Later that evening, Eleanor stayed behind long after most of the courthouse had emptied. She made a few phone calls. Pulled some strings. If Jerome was telling the truth, there had to be someone else who knew. And sure enough, she found him. The next morning, as the courtroom filled once again with reporters, lawyers, and murmuring spectators, Judge Hayes surprised everyone. She called an unscheduled witness to the stand. A man in his early 50s, dressed in a green apron over a collared shirt, stepped forward. "State your name and occupation," the clerk instructed. "Daniel Ross. I manage Hastings Market over on Pine Street." Eleanor leaned forward. "Mr. Ross, can you tell us about the grocery deliveries on the night of April 17th? The man adjusted his glasses. "Sure can. Jerome Carter comes in every Thursday evening. Picks up a few items, always for the same woman, Miss Turner. He pays cash. Never causes trouble. That night, same thing. Bought canned soup, some bread, apples, and left." The courtroom buzzed again. The prosecutor tried to dismiss it as circumstantial. But then Mr. Ross pulled a small receipt from his folder. "He might have paid cash, but I remember I wrote down a note that night. Our computer system had glitched, and I logged it manually. Here's the time and list of items. Matches what Miss Turner said he delivered." It was simple. Not flashy. Not dramatic. But it was proof. And that's all the jury needed. A verdict years in the making. The final hours of the trial moved quickly. The prosecutor, visibly rattled, offered a final argument that now sounded more like speculation than certainty. The defense simply reminded the jury, doubt isn't just present. It's undeniable. It took less than 2 hours for the jury to return. As the foreperson stood, Jerome stared at the floor again, just like he had on the first day. Not in shame this time, but in disbelief that this might really be ending. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Jerome Carter." A pause. "Not guilty." Gasps rippled across the room. Judge Hayes closed her eyes for a moment before opening them again, locking eyes with Jerome. His attorney patted him on the back, and Jerome's shoulders finally dropped, as if he'd been holding his breath for a lifetime. A judge, a friend, a second chance. As the crowd filtered out, Eleanor remained on the bench, watching Jerome slowly walk out of the defendant's box. He paused for a moment, just for her. She gave the faintest nod. No words. Just a quiet acknowledgement of something far greater than the law. This wasn't just justice. It was redemption. And maybe a second chance. The courtroom slowly emptied, but the air still crackled with emotion. Some jurors lingered in the hallway, wiping away silent tears. Spectators whispered to one another, heads shaking in disbelief, not at the verdict, but at what it revealed. The headlines outside had already started forming: Judge Free's old friend, and courtroom drama, childhood connection in surprise acquittal. Reporters lined up in the marble corridor like vultures hungry for scandal. But when the heavy courtroom doors opened, it wasn't Jerome who stepped into the spotlight. It was Judge Eleanor Hayes. Gone was the cold-eyed image the media had painted. This Eleanor was different, tired but stronger, humbled but clearer in her convictions than ever before. She stepped up to the row of microphones without prepared notes. No spokesperson. No legal jargon. Just truth. She took a deep breath, then spoke. The statement that shifted a city. Today was not just a case, she said. It was a reckoning with the way we see people, with the way we judge before we listen, with the assumptions we carry that silence the truth before it ever has a chance to speak. Her voice didn't waver. I knew Jerome Carter. Not just today. Not just this week. I knew him as a child. As a friend. And what I saw in court was not a stranger. It was that same boy, only older, tired, but still kind. Still honest. Still good. Cameras clicked. Pens scribbled. People who had come for drama found themselves in stunned silence. She continued, we must remember, justice isn't just about laws. It's about people. Behind every case file is a soul. Behind every fingerprint is a story. There was no political polish in her words. Just humanity. Jerome's new beginning. The story didn't end with the gavel. Jerome Carter, once labeled a suspect, was now something else entirely. A symbol of what's possible when justice listens instead of labels. Local organizations began to reach out. Community leaders who had quietly followed the trial offered their support. And within weeks, Jerome received an offer, a paid role mentoring at-risk youth in the very neighborhood he grew up in. The man who had once stood before the court in handcuffs now stood before classrooms and youth centers, helping teens navigate a world that often judged them too harshly, too soon. Judge Hayes didn't just sign the recommendation letter. She delivered it in person. A home rebuilt from the inside out. Months passed. Jerome didn't just work, he built. Literally. He helped design and renovate an abandoned building that had once been a hotspot for trouble. It became a youth center, filled with light, art, laughter, and hope. He named it the Oak House, after the tree he and Eleanor used to sit beneath when they were kids, dreaming about the future. The center provided tutoring, hot meals, mentorship, and most importantly, a place to feel seen. Kids who had lost faith in adults began to believe again. Because Jerome wasn't preaching at them. He'd been them. And they could see it in his eyes. Sundays at the cafe. And as for Jerome and Eleanor, they found something even rarer than redemption, reconnection. Every Sunday morning, without fail, the two of them met at a small corner cafe near Sycamore Street. No robes. No verdicts. Just two childhood friends, sipping coffee, trading stories, laughing at memories only they understood. Sometimes they talked about the case, how close it came to going the wrong way. Sometimes they talked about the kids at the youth center. And sometimes they sat in silence, just grateful to have come full circle. In a world obsessed with outrage and punishment, they had found something far more radical. Forgiveness, friendship, and the courage to begin again. Final message to your viewers. Studio microphone, sometimes, the courtroom isn't where justice ends, it's where healing begins. Maybe you know someone who's been written off, misjudged, or thrown aside. Share this story with them. Because one second chance, just one, can change everything. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. We need more stories like this in the world.